Now it is actually 3 past the hour. So welcome to the session on leadership. I think we heard in the initial session about improved leadership as part of what David Anderson talked about, what they did in the case that he and Simon walked through. So leadership is a part of strategy or improving organizations. And it's actually part of Sun Tzu's 5 fundamental factors for successful strategy. And what do we mean by leadership? It doesn't necessarily have to be a single person. It can be a shared thing where people who has the abilities can step in and do the right thing at the right time. It could be pretty much anyone, anywhere in the organizations. For me, it's a capability rather than a role. But let's get back to that. We'll talk about leadership for sustainable success in turbulent times, and we indeed live in turbulent times these days. We will hopefully get some inspiration for even more turbulent times back in the day 2,500 years ago in what is now called China. Let's see. Yeah, advice for success. Sun Tzu, assess conditions, make comparisons that shows who will succeed and who will fail. John Boyd, orientation is super important. You need to know your situation, your context. That will shape everything. Everything else follows. And then, of course, Simon Wardley emphasizing the situational awareness. That's where it all starts. Do we know our context? Or how well do we know our context? So let's visualize together and have a conversation around leadership and also assess it. And think about what capabilities would be helpful for improved orientation, for improved situational awareness, but not only for that, but for also making the right decisions, making the right choices in our context, because that's what strategy is all about, making the right choices. And by the way, I would like this very much to be a conversation. So whenever you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask. That's much more fun for you and for me. And for all of us, because if I go too fast or if I go too slow or if something is totally unintelligible, by all means, please just unmute and ask. Okay? Yes, that's me. I wrote a couple of books on the art of leadership and the art of strategy, very much inspired by ancient East Asian wisdom, Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu. I've been leading organizations of up to 400 people. And yeah, I think I was there. I'm head of Airline Solutions Nordic, and we do Elixir and Airline, open source programming languages and associated stuff. It's not the topic of this presentation, so I will move on. What I will try to do is to connect context, components, methods, and leadership, or first starting by showing how they are connected, and then we will go into leadership. But I think it's good to see how things are connected, because we talk a lot about doctrine and we talk about landscape, we draw on the map, we talk about climatic patterns, we talk about leadership. But let's try to see what we mean by all these things. And in a Wardley map, you would have the horizontal axis with Genesis or novel, you would have something custom built, you would have product or rental, and you would have commodity. And I like this illustration by a good friend and former colleague of mine called Henrik Esser. So he tried to visualize this from low predictability to high predictability. That's another evolution axis, from explorations to exploitation. Kent Beck talks about this a lot. And from initial ideas to knowledge, just to get a feel for what we mean by the horizontal axis and in Wardley mapping. And if we talk about methods or ways of working or practices, you would find certain methods more or less suited for the different stages on the evolution axis. So depending on if you're more to the left, design thinking, sometimes combined with whatever you mean by the word agile, and the more further right you get, more structured things like lean or even Six Sigma could be useful. And that was really cool in the previous session where I joined Alex Morgadas. He talked about leadership, applying leadership practices that were very suited to a Six Sigma manufacturing. You can't make any fault, you can't make any mistakes. It needs to be extremely predictable, but they just applied it in the wrong context because they were more in custom built or even Genesis or novel. So if you misapply your methods and your leadership in the wrong context, you may go horrendously wrong. And when it comes to leadership, you can put on different labels here. You can call it authoritarian, or you can call it command and control, more to the right, more participative in the middle, and heterarchy, which is a new word to me. It was the first time I heard it. I had to look it up. But that means that anyone can step into the leader role depending what is needed in the context or even in the situation. So anyone can take the lead based on his or her experiences and skill set. And you would have more of a leadership as a service type of leadership. Or I think Simon Wardley talks about leaderless leadership, but it's the same as serverless. Serverless, there are servers, right? And in leaderless leadership, there are leaders. It's just that it's not a fixed, constant role or a hat. Maybe it's more of a hat, actually. So you can take on that hat, act, and lead based on the situation and the needs of the situation and the people in the situation. So I'm going to pause here and ask for comments or reflections. So we have a bit more of an interactive thing here. Any thoughts on this?
It makes sense, I think.
I mean, getting the word, what is the genesis of that word, heterarchy?
It must be some Greek word. So the same way as heterogeneous and homogeneous. Heterarchy has something to do with hierarchy or some kind of structure.
Monarchy, maybe.
Yeah, monarchy. That's when you have one king to rule them all. Heterarchy, without having looked it up, if you go back to Greek, you would probably find out that heterarchy would mean that leadership can come from anyone, anywhere in the organization. And it can be changing over time, depending on the situation. Hi, Manish. Welcome to the session. Good to see you.
Hello, Erik. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Interesting topic.
Yeah, I hope so. So we're just getting warmed up here with connecting context, the situational awareness, different components in your product, the different methods potentially used depending on where you are on the evolution axis, and different kinds of leadership. Okay, let's move on. Yes, we do live in turbulent times. There's a war going on. There was a pandemic. Maybe we have survived that, most of us. And there's a lot of economic and social upheaval. So it is indeed turbulent times. But if we go back 2,500 years to China, or what is now called China, it wasn't even China. It was wars, it was pandemics, it was economic and social upheavals. There were, in fact, 500 years of wars, pandemics, and economic and social upheavals. So it was really orders of magnitude, factor 10 or factor 100 more turbulent 2,500 years ago in what is now China. So I think there could be some inspiration. There could be some patterns, capabilities that we could find there to help us out today. And there's this fascinating person called Lao Tzu, and maybe he didn't even exist. Maybe it's just ideas that are told that he was the author or the writer of, or the philosopher behind, or the leadership expert behind. Maybe he didn't even exist. Maybe it's just a lot of ancient wisdom that was collected in writing over several hundred years till it reached a certain degree of stability. So it may have been some crowdsourcing going on even 2,000-3,000 years ago. This is an interesting Chinese character. These are pictograms, so they're formed out of other pictures, so pictures that have meaning, and then you can form new meanings. So it's like atoms forming into molecules with new behaviors and new characteristics. Here you have a part called ear, which means ear, or the noun would be ear and the verb would be listen. And you have another one which would mean mouth as a noun or speak as a verb, and then something which means complete or contain. So if I ask you to be very creative now, be very innovative, and try to come up with a compound of these three subparts, what would be the compound meaning of this?
Success.
Knowledge or understanding.
Good guesses. Not quite there yet. Knowledge, success, yeah. More ideas?
Shared purpose. I don't know if you have to listen and speak the same. To be-
Agreement. I'm sorry.
Leadership.
Leadership. Yeah. Yeah, but you need knowledge. You need to listen. You need to speak. There has to be some kind of completeness. Purpose is involved, of course. So you're all correct. So this one interpretation would be a skilled leader. Skilled leader listens first, speaks then, and kind of completeness. Okay, just gonna do two more, and then the guessing game is so foot or step, and a head or to give direction. So what would give direction to your steps? What could that be? Say again.
A map.
A map? Yeah, good. Good guess. Very close. Not
Destination.
destination goal. Yeah, almost. Very close. Very close.
The path.
Yeah.
Path.
Yeah, the path. The path, yes, that's the standard interpretation would be the path or the way. Shreya, what did you say? I did hear.
I said the same with the way.
So
It's strategy.
strategy, yeah. You're very close, all of you. I would say purpose. The modern interpretation, the modern one translation, one perspective would be purpose. But you could talk about the way. You could talk about, But I think what we today would, in the modern Western world, at least, we would talk about purpose.
Erik, how would you pronounce those pictographs?
I have no idea because I don't speak Chinese. I'm trying to learn. I lived in Japan for a number of years and they use the same pictogram alphabet, or it's not an alphabet, it's pictograms. But I don't know the pronunciation. Sorry.
I think I know them, but I'm quite confused. I was born in China, so
Yeah.
so the first one is Sheng, the second one is Dao.
Yeah. That sounds familiar. And of course,
At least in Mandarin, I think the reason it's translated to Tao is because it's been so the missionaries they came from Canton. They spoke Cantonese, so that's why I got Cantonese.
Thank you. And of course, then you would know that you could interpret these differently, and they have been interpreted differently, and no one really knows how they were interpreted 2,000 or 3,000 or even earlier times ago. There might have been different interpretations, different meanings for the people living 3,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago. Okay, final one. Step, straight, heart, and mind. Taking steps, moving straight, following your heart and mind. What would be the modern day interpretation or meaning of taking steps?
Strategy?
Yeah.
If you have decided something, you may following a decision, maybe.
Yeah. What about the heart and mind? A decision following your heart and mind.
Value?
Value?
Virtue?
Virtue, yeah. Virtue is actually one translation or one interpretation of this character. The more
It's
classic.
5 factors. It must be doctrine. But
Yeah. Focus. Everything you're getting there. Close, but no cigar yet. It's integrity. So if you walk straight ahead and you follow your heart and mind, that's one interpretation would be integrity in the modern Western world, at least, where I grew up. I'm from Sweden, but I lived in Japan, I lived in the US, I lived in Germany. So I'm trying to be open to different perspectives. Okay, so now I gave you the essence of Lao Tzu, and I think this book, which is called the Tao Te Ching, very bad at pronouncing it. The meaning would be on purpose and integrity, because those 2 pictograms on the right, that's the title of the book. And I think this book is about leadership, not in the traditional manager or emperor or king type of leadership. It's about people everywhere being leaders. There's a very famous quote from the text where it says that when you have truly succeeded, the people will say, we did it ourselves. So truly self-organized leadership, and people feel that they have done it themselves through common acts of leadership. Let's see. Let's dig in. Now we get into not a Wardley map. This is a value chain. So it's a dependency graph of capabilities or leadership capabilities. And we start with stakeholders and their needs. And then we will look into capabilities. It's a slight variation of a value chain. This is very much inspired by something called maturity mapping by Chris McDermott and Mark Bergauer, where they apply Wardley mapping to what you need to do as a team or a part of an organization in order to fulfill your strategy or fulfill your customer needs. But then it's more about what tooling and methods you need in context. But I think it's equally useful to use this approach when it comes to leadership, because in different types of situations, you would need different types of leadership. So we would start with the stakeholders or the users. So in this case, it would be societies, communities, families, or individuals. They have a need. And back in what is now China, 2,500 years ago, it was about succeeding sustainably in turbulent times. Or you might just call it survive, because it was really tough times. But let's put it in a positive frame: sustainable success in turbulent times. And one capability would be to be effective in the sense of achieving maximum outcomes with minimum efforts. And I'm going to stop a bit here just to make sure that you take the opportunity to ask questions or share your reflections or comments, because I'm tuning and tweaking the Wardley mapping a bit here, totally on purpose, fit the context of leadership. Questions or comments at this point?
I'm just thinking that when you are not in turbulent times, then you forget all these old things that habits that you used to do, because you don't need to be effective. So now I feel we need to reinvent those things that maybe some of our ancestors did, because we have been living in, too comfortable somehow.
That's a very good point, Christian. Thank you for raising it. I fully agree with you.
So what strikes me a little bit in this statement is that it's very quantitative. It says maximum and minimum. And that, of course, because this talk is about leadership, it might not always be quantifiable. And the definition of effectiveness, maybe it comes later.
This would be the definition of effectiveness, or at least my interpretation of reading Lao Tzu and some other philosophers or leadership gurus from the time. And sometimes they use the metaphor of cooking. And I think the metaphor of cooking is quite interesting, because the metaphor would be that you don't let anything go to the waste bin. You want to use everything. Every single part of the animal, every single part of the vegetable should go in there. And you make use of it in a smart way. And you use the right animals or vegetables depending on the season. And so the cooking metaphor, where you don't put anything in the waste basket and you get something very creative by combining things in a good way, so that you make a harmonious mix of ingredients that will be very tasty and not let anything go to waste. Good that you brought that up. And does that explain a bit the sort of meaning or definition of effective?
Yeah, I definitely get the least weight part. The risk is always that when you say that you want to really put something to you define effectiveness and the optimality with a maximum. For instance, the concept of growth in economy, right? You really don't want to maximize the use of the global resources here and now. You really want to increase the carrying capacity. So I just feel that sometimes maximum is not the optimal stage.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. And words matter. And in this case, you want to maximize good outcomes. We don't talk about growth, but you're right. It could lead you wrong so that you just maximize for value or value in the sense of profit from a company. That's not what I'm after here. Maximum outcomes in this of the taste of a good meal, for instance. That's also an outcome where you want to maximize the sort of harmonious taste of that meal. So it's a good comment, and I need to think about this, maximizing it. This is not a mathematical, strict academic definition. So think more about the metaphor. And also going to China 2,000, 3,000 years ago, they were allergic to formal definitions. They never formally defined things. They always spoke in metaphors and analogies and stories. So this is my simple attempt to summarize something very deep in a one-liner.
I think also there's a key thing you say, sustainable success, because sustainable leads down to your definition of effective.
Sustainable was, we're looking at that, is that the stakeholders didn't cover maybe limitations in resources. So again, it's around not the maximum outcome. I think in Agile, it's again, maximizing the business value. So you're just trying to produce the best way you can in a sustainable way. But, and that's in team velocity. But yeah, you feel that we're missing element here of, without impacting others or something in that's may need to be considered in this future world rather than wasn't considered in the past world.
That's a good observation, a good reflection. I think my take on that would be the sustainable part. If you want to do something sustainable, then you have to consider how to maximize the outcomes and minimizing the efforts in a sustainable way. You could do it very short-sighted and you'd be gone in a week, basically. But this is about doing it in an effective way, not too much efforts, minimum efforts, and then getting the most out of it. And again, think about the cooking metaphor. How do you get the most out of the ingredients that you can find at any point in time of the year, depending on the season? So that's the kind of effectiveness. It's more of a qualitative thing than a quantitative thing. Cool. We move on. Now I'm going to start at the bottom and going back to this heart mindful. I think the cool thing here is combining both the thoughts and the feelings, combining the heart and the mind. It's not either or. Sometimes in software engineering and computer science, we're very binary. It's 0 or 1, black or white, heart or mind. That's not what ancient Eastern wisdom tells us. It's about both and. So accessing both your thoughts and your feelings and let them guide each other and listen to your heart, but by all means use your brain as well. Then being aware, trying to always have this beginner's mind or seeing with fresh eyes and avoid too many labels and judgments because you may go completely wrong. Try to be as neutral and as objective as you possibly can and don't label things and judge things unnecessarily because you may not know. And then we come back to integrity. Follow your heart and mind. You remember this Chinese pictogram? Walking straight, following both heart and mind. That's having integrity. Trusting. Trust is important. We had a very good discussion in the previous session about the fintech case that Alex Morgadas was talking about. And in addition to strategic choices and doctrine, we realized that if he wouldn't have had the trust of the vice presidents and the C-suite, he wouldn't have succeeded. So trust is very important. And here, you start by trusting. You start by assuming other people have integrity. Sometimes, in some people and some cultures, you need to establish trust by showing that you're trustworthy. But here, it's another twist. You start to trust people, and by showing that you trust them, you get the trust from them. So that's what this advises us to do. Helpful, attending to folks' needs, trying to understand what people need in the context and in the situation. Someone might be a super expert in one area, and they might need a lot of help in another area. Maybe someone is great at programming or coding, but may need help and has a need to learn new things. For example, Wardley mapping, which he or she may not yet know. It's really situational and looking into people's needs in the situation. Integrative. This goes back to this thing about not being binary, integrating opposite and complementary perspectives, being open to different perspectives, maybe not even two perspectives, maybe it's more, maybe all the perspectives of the people in the room or in the group, and trying to be curious about those perspectives and then trying to put the perspectives together to get a more complete picture of the situation. And by having all these things in place, then we can create, or rather create together, a purpose that we act in accordance with. Because if we know people's needs, we assume their integrity, and we integrate opposite and complementary perspectives, and we're aware without labels and judgment, then it's much more easy to create a common purpose that we can all feel that we have a stake in and that we want to contribute to. So the key word is co-creating and then acting accordingly. Yeah, when you know the purpose, you can also then look at the complete system, look at all the components and try to avoid sub-optimizing for certain parts, which is very easy. You may optimize for the team, but maybe if you have 2 teams or 5 teams or 10 teams or 100 teams, it doesn't make sense to optimize for one team only. So trying to look at the whole. And then flexible, changing when circumstances change. That's what some people call agile these days, or agility. And it was already important 2,500 years ago. Collaborative, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So enable cooperation and do it without pressure and control. Pressure and control is bad. It comes back time and time again in Lao Tzu. You should facilitate collaboration and not put pressure, not try to control and not use command and control. And then facilitative, having the ability to act as a facilitator and creating the boundaries so that people and teams and even organizations can self-organize. And then you would be effective if we put all these things together. Coming back to the original question, what is effectiveness? Effectiveness needs all these capabilities below: facilitative, flexible, collaborative, holistic, purposive, helpful, trusting, integrative, aware, and heart-mindful. That's the one interpretation of the message on leadership from Lao Tzu from 2,500 years ago.
Erik, I had a quick question.
Sure.
So obviously, I was familiar with Lao Tzu's work long before I came across this terminology of servant leadership. Would it make, and to me, what was written in servant leadership actually was completely embodied in Lao Tzu's work. So are you seeing it in the same way, or am I just making a very simplistic kind of connection? Yeah, so
you're seeing it exactly the same way as I do. So thanks you for bringing that up, Sean. This is servant leadership. You can put different labels, and you can have, Lao Tzu would be a bit allergic to put labels on things. He would rather probably tell a story or have some analogy or a metaphor. But this is servant leadership. And I could actually start, if I do like this, I want to do like this. No, I don't want to do like that. I want to show you another picture actually to hook onto that. I'll do like this. I had this as a hidden slide, but I can actually show that because I think this is pretty important.
While you do that, Erik, I have a question.
Sure.
Give an example of a team, one of team that is struggling, maybe, I don't know, but you have to look at the system holistically. That's what, yeah. But I've been into that situation where as part of organization change management, I saw a team struggling because they didn't have a structure. Their kind of work is such that it was more of a pioneering, and then they had struggles of their own that were not addressed as part of the whole system. So would you leave the team with no help, or how do you say that?
Mhm.
Because other teams are in harmony, probably. Would you let one team be in their situation because you cannot help them holistically as part of policy?
That's a really tough question because you really don't know. So what I would do in that situation, I would probably have this image on the back of my head and start asking curious questions, and maybe even draw this together with the team on a whiteboard or in a virtual room, and then try to ask them to understand, okay, try to identify where they don't work. Is it about, do they have a purpose? Did they co-create a purpose? Are they helpful? Are they trusting? Do they have integrity? Do they have access to both thoughts and feelings? Are they aware, or are they making judgments a lot? Are they labeling things? And can they integrate perspective? So I would try to use this and find where they don't have the capability as a team, or where someone in the team lacks the ability and potentially breaks the team. That's one approach you could take in such a situation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done some dissertation, agile dissertation around that, where you're looking at how they feel, how they look at the team and how they see themselves. And usually it's trying to understand, is it actually how they act? Is how they see themselves, how they acting? And the other thing you can do is there's DISC, which is basically just analyzing the different approaches and characters within teams and where they sit in the DISC framework. And then they can understand if there's someone that's more, how they're interacting as a team, and the trust usually comes out of that, the integrity, the awareness of how people react differently to different things and approaches. There's also other tips.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Tim. I totally agree with you. I think that there's the different colors, red, green, blue, yellow. There's this 4-letter acronyms, ETBJF, whatever, 4-letter acronyms. There are many ways to skin a cat. And these are, for me, starting points, because if you're not careful, you're labeling people. Okay, he's a blue person or she's a red person. And that's very dangerous because they might be typed for the rest of their lives, which, I mean, people are different and we all have these colors in ours. If we take the color metaphor, we're all rainbow in a sense, and some colors are stronger in certain situations and in certain contexts. So I think that's important to take into account. And of course, doing that exercise is a good starting point because people realize we're different. And we often think that we're the same. And if you're in an engineering environment, maybe people 80% are very similar, but those who are not, then maybe your default way of working, your default protocol for communication will break down because they're not like you. And maybe when they're under stress, they're even more or less like you and works even less. And sometimes an exercise, just to hook on to what you say, Tim, you could do this thing where people talk about what do they need and what can they offer. So you can do that as something like a marketplace. That's a cool exercise that I've seen over the years and even tried a few times. You go to the marketplace and everyone says, this is what I can offer. This is my sort of things I would like to offer to the rest of the team. And this is what I need from the rest of the team. So you talk about your strengths and weaknesses in another metaphor. And you don't talk about the colors. You don't talk about the disc. You talk about your needs. And then we're back to attending to folks' needs. You talk about your needs, and maybe you even have something under the table in that marketplace, something secret. And you may choose to reveal some secrets about yourselves in such an exercise, or maybe not. It's totally up to you what you reveal. But then that also starts the process of building trust. Because if you dare to reveal a small little secret about yourself, not everyone knows, and you show that to the rest of the team, that's also part of making the team work more as a team or be more collaborative. Okay. Yeah, really good conversation. I'm trying to go back to Schön, your question here. And yes, I did a little exercise where I tried to look at a lot of people and leadership theories and practices. And We have servant leadership somewhere here. Yes, Greenleaf servant leadership. And we have Mary Parker Follett, integrative leadership. We have Nora Bateson. We have Kim Scott. We have quantum management. So all through history, a lot of people have espoused this similar ideas and similar capabilities regarding leadership. And I haven't found anything earlier than Lao Tzu. But I think it's interesting also that you see Lord Nelson, who was he was a lord of the seas, and he was in the military, or in the navy rather. And you have Moltke, who was a German chief of staff. So this is fascinating because these leadership principles can be used and have been used in very different contexts. So they are potential principles. Maybe they are first principles of leadership because we have seen them work in such different contexts, and so different people using them. So there might be an element of truth in them.
Yeah. Erik, you may just somewhere want to, the David Marquez turn the ship around. That would fit here somewhere as well, I think.
Yes, of course. I forgot that. It should be in here. Why isn't it? Because that's part of the Auftragstaktik, the mission command, turn the ship around. It's related to Lord Nelson, even back in the early 19th century. So definitely. So that's the same kind of trust your people.
Yes.
They will do awesome things. And then you just make sure that they have the right capabilities in terms of training. And a very good point. Thank you for adding that to the list.
Yeah. Yes.
One observation on looking at this picture here is you don't get to pick what you're effective at. And so it seems like if you have in mind to achieve a specific something, then you need to have the power to select people that you get to work with here. Because without being able to influence selection of those people, then you don't get to pick your purpose or your outcomes.
That's a very good observation, Tristan. Thanks for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. Normally in a business context, you won't pick your team or you won't pick your organization. You have the people you have the organization you have, and that goes even for non-profit organization. And I think that's okay. I think what I've written here, of course you can train and practice many of them. It's easier for some people to do some of these things than for other people. But just by putting this on the table, by making it explicit, maybe you draw it on the whiteboard and you start talking about these things. But again, maybe you don't need all of them in a single person, because that would be a superhuman or a superhero or a god. But each and every member of the team, the collection of team members, hopefully you have most of these, and you can start defining your purpose, which maybe is not 100% of what you would like, because you need to have some kind of coherence or harmonization or alignment with what your organization is trying to achieve. And this is pretty important. So you're right, you cannot create your own purpose completely from scratch. You need to consider some boundary conditions, which would be the mission or the vision of the company or a specific target that you're working on. But having done your homework together, maybe you, in some cases, want to change that slightly because you have realized things by looking at opposite and complementary perspectives that you had in the team or you're part of the organization that others were not aware of. So you might want to change the higher vision or mission or purpose of the larger part of the organization. But it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. So good point.
But maybe I just feel it's better not to select the right people here, because as you said earlier on, the leadership is not a role, but a capability. Everybody can practice leadership. And so I think if we look at this picture, like being the capability definition of the people who are having the role of leaders, that would be a little bit too unambitious. It's like in every meeting, every one of us can actually play a role in cultivating these qualities in everywhere we are. And therefore, yeah, I just feel it's good enough as it is.
I'm not suggesting it be changed. What I'm observing, for example, is if the capabilities that matter to you is being effective at defending you from invaders, if you don't have ability to select people, and if you have a bunch of pacifists, then you will not be effective at defending from invaders. And so there's the context of, I'm not saying this needs to be audited, but there is an underlying thing of, if you don't get to select people, then there's purposes, co-creating purpose and acting accordingly. So it's going to be co-created with whomever you have. And the only way to guide it is by selecting the people, because it's probably easier than changing their minds. It's the quote that comes to mind is that if you wish to build a ship, don't divide the people into teams and send them to forest to cut wood. Instead, teach them to long for the vast and endless sea, sort of thing. It's if you select the people that share your purpose, then when you're co-creating, it'll be the purpose that you care about, which might or might not be appropriate to survive.
I got your point. Okay. Yeah, it's not the people with the skills, but the people with the mindset and with, Yeah,
that's a really important point, because this is not about changing people's mindset. You cannot change people's mindset, and you should not change people's mindset, because then you're back into pressure and control. If you would talk to Lao Tzu, you would rather drum up the desire to go beyond the sea and build a ship together. And the people you are working with, then you need to work together on co-creating the purpose. Again, it might be an element of having it given from other parts of the organization, but to see really good purposes would be when you have co-created them or collaborated in doing it, preferably on a whiteboard, maybe using a Wardley map to help you out as well.
I do not completely agree with this picking the right people. This is, of course, an easy or the fastest way to change the mindset of an organization. But on the long run, you have much more option when you have a very diverse setup. And diverse setup also means that there are different people with maybe also a different mindset. And a great leader actually integrates these different opinions and is able to change something, maybe not on the fast run. Something has to go really fast, and it's probably easier to pick a task for with the right people to do the things. But the long run, I think leadership is taking the resources that you have the best out of it. More like the coach at the ball game, where you have stronger guys in the defense and the faster ones, the wings or in the front. And depending how old and how fast they get, you would change the position. I think picking is good when you build up something, then it helps a lot. But if you always pick, then you get the same as you are. So I think this is a controversial discussion.
Yeah, and this shows the importance of having different perspectives in such discussions. This is an important thing, right? And it might be easier if you're a startup to select people, right? And then you need to be mindful of that you don't select people who are just like you are, but that you look at people who have both the sort of technical skills that complement you, but also the non-technical skills or human skills that we have, for example, on this chart here, the different capabilities, so that you make sure that you have a team where all of these capabilities exist, because then you will be sustainably successful in turbulent times.
I think there's some conflation that sharing a purpose does not mean being the same people. So selecting people for a purpose does not imply selecting all the same people for a purpose. You could have a diverse team that shares the purpose. So you can have a monolithic purpose with a diverse group of people, or you can have multiple purposes with monolithic people, or you can have monolithic purpose with monolithic people. Those are not coupled together.
Very good point. Very good point. Completely agree.
So Erik, in your work with, I don't know if you have the data or statistics, this in large organizations, especially those have been operating in the hierarchical operational mode for a few decades, big financial institutions, big public institutions, this is probably not something that is the second nature of the leadership team or the management team. The prevailing management culture is not what we have just seen. And so just curious, so who are doing this and what type of companies are actually having this mindset, if we may call it, in their management/leadership teams?
Thank you for asking that question. I have another hidden slide that I now hope to see. So I think we have a couple of, or more than a couple, we have some companies all over the world who are operating, maybe not 100% in line with these capabilities, but 80, 90%. Everything from Haier in China and GE Appliances, both are in white goods, so manufacturing companies, but moving towards being more innovative and service-based. We have Chog, that's originally a Dutch health service provider. Patagonia, the US outdoor gear maker. We have Scania and Toyota being a truck maker from Sweden, but active globally. Toyota Automotives, originally from Japan. And Spotify, you may have heard of, digital music company founded in Stockholm 15 or so years ago. And also Trifork, a Danish company, also operates very much in according to these principles. So there are companies doing this. So you cannot say it cannot be done these days. It can be done. That excuse.
And is Erlang Solutions just a part of the slide design? Is it also?
Yeah, we're actually part of this. We're part of Trifork. So we're part of the Trifork family. So
I
we
see.
operate it not 100%, but we try the best.
Okay, but that's less than 2 handfuls what you have on this slide.
I'm sure there are more companies doing it. Those are the ones that I find in a simple search, and by ticking the boxes and coming up with more than 80%, then it was my limiting factor for making it to this slide. But my point is, there are examples, and it's not like you can say it's only in Western countries, or it's only in Eastern countries, or it's only in manufacturing, or it's only in digital companies. So I think there's a diverse set of different types of companies.
So there was some company called Morningstar.
Yes, good example.
Yeah, and there's another company, Mexican company, forget cement.
Yeah, Cemex. I think I didn't analyze them in details, but they often come up in these kind of discussions. So that's a good point. I will do a little analysis how they fit with the previous slide. Cemex and Morningstar. Good, thank you. Okay, we're nearing the end of the hour. We have 1 minute left, unless there's something final short question. Otherwise, I would very much like to thank you for joining the session. This was very valuable to me, and I think we had some interactive conversations around leadership. I hope it was helped by the visualization and inspiration from back in the day.
Great
Very
talk.
nice. Thank
Great
you.
session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you all for coming. Take care. See you in
Thank
the
you.
coming sessions.
See you.
Yes.
Thanks, Erik.
Thank you. Bye-bye.